Let's begin with premise one. Premise one says it is morally wrong to kill a human being. So let's assume, Marion Warren assumes that human being, the term in premise one, is being used in the moral sense. Um, the main reason I think that this is the case, that premise one is using human being in the moral sense, is because it's saying that it's morally wrong to kill a human being. And if we understand human being in the moral sense, then what we're essentially saying is that it's morally wrong to kill a member of the moral community. And that makes sense on the face of it because members of the moral community it's generally understood, deserve protection against being harmed or killed. Okay, so it makes the most sense to say that human being is being used in the moral sense in premise one. So let's move on to the second premise, which Warren sees as the real problematic premise of the argument. Premise two says a fetus is an innocent human being. Now, according to Warren, human being in this second premise is used in either the genetic sense or the moral sense. So let's start with the possibility that it's being used in the genetic sense. If so, then premise two would essentially read something like this. A fetus is an innocent member of the genetic species Homo sapien. Okay? And then it would conclude, thus it's morally wrong to kill a fetus. But this argument would have a clear problem. And that problem is that the term human being is not being used consistently in the first and second premise. To put it basically, premise one uses human being in the moral sense, but premise two would use it in the genetic sense. And for an argument to be logical, in order for it to avoid the fallacy of equivocation, it must use the term consistently with the same meaning throughout the argument. Since this argument does not do that, it suffers from the fallacy of equivocation. It's trying to equivocate two different terms that have two different meanings. And that is illogical. For example, here's another argument that suffers from the fallacy of equivocation. Donald Trump is running for president of the United States. One ought not run through the hallways. Thus, Donald Trump ought not run for president in the hallways. That argument makes no sense, and it's primarily because I'm using the term run or running in two different senses. I'm using it, we might say, in the political sense, right? When you're running for president, for office. But then there's the general activity sense when you're running through the hallways or running across the field, okay? They don't mean the same thing in premise one and premise two, and therefore my conclusion doesn't hold. It doesn't really make sense. And the same would be said about this argument if premise two intends the genetic sense of human being. Okay, so that didn't work. That argument would be illogical. So let's try the moral sense of human being in premise two, and let's see if the argument fares any better that way.